The 20-point peace plan announced by U.S. President Donald Trump has become the latest and most ambitious attempt to find a way out of the war in Gaza. The document does more than call for calm. It lays out in detail how the fighting could stop, how hostages and prisoners might be exchanged, and how Gaza could be governed in the months to come. Its release has triggered sharp and immediate reactions from Israel, from Hamas, from Arab and Muslim countries, and from the wider international community. To understand the debate, it is necessary to walk carefully through the points of the plan, the responses of the stakeholders, and the events that have followed since its announcement. The first point is an immediate ceasefire. Both Israel's bombardment and Hamas rocket fire would have to stop within hours of the plan's acceptance. This provision is designed to freeze the battlefield and prevent further casualties. The second point is the release of all Israeli hostages, alive or dead, within 72 hours. Hostages have been at the center of Israel's war aims, and the families of those taken on October 7th have pressed for their return above all else. The third point mirrors this. Israel would release thousands of Palestinian prisoners, including many detained since the beginning of the conflict. The fourth point offers amnesty for Hamas fighters who disarm according to the plan. They would be allowed to leave Gaza safely, avoiding prosecution or targeted killings. For Trump's team, this is meant to provide a face-saving exit for fighters while reducing the armed threat in Gaza. The fifth point establishes a transitional Palestinian governing committee composed not of politicians but of technocrats. This committee would administer Gaza, handle reconstruction, and restore basic services. The sixth point creates a board of peace, chaired by Trump himself, with international representatives. This board would oversee implementation, supervise aid, and resolve disputes. The seventh point is full demilitarization of Gaza. Rockets, mortars, tunnels, and small arms would be dismantled or surrendered. The eighth point requires Israel to withdraw its forces to staging areas on Gaza's perimeter. Israeli officials would retain the right to re-enter if security is threatened, but they would no longer occupy central Gaza. The ninth point calls for a large-scale humanitarian surge. Food, water, medicine, and fuel would be sent in under international coordination. The 10th point demands the reopening of border crossings under external monitoring to balance humanitarian access with Israeli security concerns. The 11th point establishes a global reconstruction fund financed by the United States, European countries, and wealthy Arab states. The 12th point enforces strict audits of aid to prevent corruption or diversion to armed groups. The 13th point encourages the creation of foreign investment zones inside Gaza to stimulate jobs and long-term growth. The 14th point proposes retraining Palestinian security forces under international supervision. The 15th point invites regional powers Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia to act as guarantors of the deal. The 16th point, however, makes the United States the ultimate enforcer of the plan. The 17th point explicitly guarantees Israel's right to self-defense. This provision reassures Israeli leaders that if the deal collapses, they may act militarily. The 18th point bans Hamas from participating in future governance. This is consistent with Israel's demand that Hamas be excluded entirely from political life. The 19th point allows for sanctions against any side Israeli, Palestinian, or foreign that violates the terms. The 20th point mentions a pathway to Palestinian self-determination, but the language is vague. There are no details on borders, on Jerusalem, or on refugees. For many observers, this final point is the weakest link in the entire framework. Stakeholders reacted quickly. Israel supported the emphasis on disarmament and on excluding Hamas from power. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised the plan's security focus, but he was unambiguous. Israel will not enter into negotiations over Palestinian statehood. For Israel, the priority is security, not sovereignty. Hamas rejected the plan outright. Leaders described it as a demand for unconditional surrender. Disarmament, international supervision, and exclusion from governance were red lines they refused to cross. To Hamas, accepting the plan would mean abandoning the Palestinian struggle. Arab and Muslim countries were divided. Saudi Arabia and Egypt cautiously welcomed the humanitarian provisions but insisted that Jerusalem and the West Bank must also be addressed. Qatar, Turkey, and Jordan criticized the plan as one-sided. They argued that no agreement can be legitimate without recognizing Palestinian sovereignty. The United Nations echoed this view, warning that a plan without a two-state horizon cannot produce sustainable peace. European governments expressed doubts about whether a technocratic committee could represent Palestinians fairly or whether reconstruction could proceed under military threat. Events on the ground unfolded as the plan was debated. On October 1st, Israel's defense minister ordered the evacuation of Gaza City. Civilians who remained were told they would be treated as combatants. On October 2nd, the Israeli Navy intercepted the global Sumed Flotilla 13 vessels carrying aid and international activists headed for Gaza. Israel detained the ships and their passengers, calling them a security threat. The interception drew sharp condemnation from Turkey, Qatar, and Malaysia, and human rights groups accused Israel of blocking humanitarian relief. The incident recalled the 2010 Mavi Marmara raid and reinforced the centrality of the blockade in the conflict. Inside Gaza, rare protests erupted. Civilians demanded food and medicine and expressed anger at Hamas. Reports suggested Hamas responded with arrests, and in some cases, executions of suspected opponents. These events showed the desperation of the population, trapped between Israeli bombardment and Hamas control. For neighboring states, the plan also raised concerns. Egypt worried it would be pressured to absorb refugees. Jordan feared instability in the West Bank. Saudi Arabia, balancing its ties with Washington and its leadership role in the Muslim world, stopped short of endorsing the deal but repeated that statehood was essential. Iran denounced the plan as an American attempt to eliminate the Palestinian cause and vowed continued support for armed resistance. At the center of every reaction was the same unresolved question: Palestinian sovereignty. Israel said no. Hamas said no to conditional arrangements. Muslim governments said no peace is possible without it. The international community reiterated that only a two-state solution can end the cycle. But the Trump plan, while detailed on ceasefires and aid, avoided this issue. The capture of the global Sumed Flotilla, the evacuation of Gaza City, the protests inside the Strip of these underscore the wider crisis. The Palestinian people remain under blockade, suffering displacement and bombardment. Israelis remain concerned about rockets, tunnels, and hostages. The region remains unstable, caught between diplomacy and war. Trump's 20-point plan offers a structured framework: a ceasefire, exchanges of hostages and prisoners, reconstruction funds, and international oversight. It could deliver a pause in violence. But it does not address the core issues of Jerusalem, of refugees, and of Palestinian statehood. For that reason, it may bring only temporary relief rather than lasting peace. In conclusion, the plan is detailed, ambitious, and framed as a solution. Yet reactions make clear why it may fail. Israel refuses to concede sovereignty. Hamas refuses to surrender. Arab states refuse to support an arrangement without recognition of Palestine. And Palestinians themselves remain caught in a humanitarian catastrophe without resolving the fundamental question of statehood. No plan, no matter how many points it contains, cannot end this conflict permanently. At best, it may stop the fighting for a time. At worst, it may entrench the divisions even further.